Welcome to the Real Estate and Wealth Podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the world of real estate investing and wealth creation. This podcast is brought to you by Calvert Home Mortgage Investment Corporation, your trusted, caring, and responsive short-term mortgage lender in Alberta and Ontario. We explore strategic and tactical solutions to elevate your real estate portfolio, drawing insights from seasoned Canadian investors and trusted advisors. In each episode, we dive into various aspects of real estate investing, including market trends, property analysis, financing strategies, risk management, and much more. Whether you're a seasoned real estate investor looking to expand your portfolio or a beginner taking those first steps, this podcast is for you.
Welcome to Real Estate and Wealth. Today we have Dan and Nick here, who I've known for coming on 5 years now. I view them as two of the preeminent, I won't call you economists, but maybe analysts, educators in the real estate investment space in Canada. And I see them providing value everywhere to all sorts of people, but I'll let them do a better job of introducing themselves.
I don't know if I can do a better job than that. I appreciate it though. Yeah, I'm Nick. This is Dan.
Yeah, I'm Dan, Daniel Foch. We host the Canadian Real Estate Investor Podcast, which is, I think, currently Canada's #1 real estate podcast. We do events coast to coast, and we have an education platform where we teach people how to invest in real estate the right way, because apparently a lot of people have been doing it the wrong way the past couple of years based on what I'm seeing in the market right now.
Yeah, the last few decades, I think it was masked by an upward market.
Yeah, so like for the first 20 years of that they were doing it the right way, right?
Because you couldn't lose.
Yeah, and then when you could, then the music stops at some point. So yeah.
I'm also a mortgage broker, Dan's real estate agent. It's funny, most people don't know that about us. And they're like, yeah, you guys just do real estate, right? Like, yes, but we actually are professionals in the space as well. So
it is kind of people to assume that like somebody would just create a real estate podcast
without
the goodness of their heart.
Yeah. So one of the things that, as Dan mentioned, the kind of national network, we have been able to facilitate great relationships with people such as yourselves and a bunch of other professionals in other provinces, pretty much coast to coast at this point, in order to help investors get deals done, whether you're in unaffordable markets like Toronto and Vancouver or more affordable markets like Calgary. We kind of lend helping hands across the board, and it's been a ton of fun. We've met a lot of amazing people along the way. So that's who we are, and I guess why we're here.
I love it. And another thing that the audience should hear, who probably most of you are already familiar, but what I love about the approach is how straight you guys shoot it. Like it's very analytical, by the numbers, not providing, hypotheticals or hyperbole, which we see a lot of investors and real estate professionals do to spin it, so to speak. So I love the approach you take. Like, the market is what the market is. Here's what to look for, and here's how to take advantage. So I love that approach that you guys take.
Yeah, I think we just went in with like no real agenda, in the sense of like, what are we going to get out of this? How much business are we going to get out of this? That wasn't the driving force behind it. The driving force kind of on our second chance here, because we did have a much worse podcast before this.
You're evolving.
And that's what it was. And we wanted to do something different this time around. And there was something lacking in the space from an honest education standpoint, that I could get my news from, that I could listen to investing fundamentals and principles and all these things that you hear about that most people don't understand, that a lot of people really do need to understand. Because as you guys said, the investing world has changed drastically in the past few years. And a lot of people love real estate in Canada and they just don't know how to get in and navigate. And we just wanted to create essentially real estate school. So that's why, again, we don't have a lot of guests. It's really data driven, distilled reports, and a lot of work goes into each episode, but we have a ton of fun with it.
I can tell. Listener, I told you guys, and I was joking when you guys came to the office today. I'm waiting for that episode, the dump episode. You watch like one of your favorite sitcoms or something, and it's just one of the clip episodes, and
the writers took a day off or something.
And you guys haven't done that yet, which I love. You said something that I want to hit on, though. Honest education. Jesse hit on the fact that your guys' pod, it's data driven. It's not anecdotal. You guys aren't stoking any fires or any commentary nonsense like that. But why don't we parlay that into about the course that you guys are doing? That's good to talk about that. You mentioned this to me a while ago. You were really fired up about that. Why don't you tell us about what that course is and what it looks like today?
I'll let Dan answer that one, but I will say that it was, we avoided starting a course and becoming, gurus or whatever you want to call it in the space, coaches, man. We avoided it like the plague for a long time because truthfully, there's a lot of not so great coaches and gurus and stuff that give not so great advice. And we know that because we did a lot of due diligence and have been kind of keeping an eye on that space for quite some time. And I think a lot of people got really bad advice. And we wanted to take the same approach that we were from the podcast and kind of put it into a more structured, almost curriculum where people could really follow along and learn. So I'll let Dan jump into the kind of the details of what actually happens in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an expansion of the principles that we talk about on the show. So sound investment, financial analysis, fundamentals, buying in a good market, understanding what a good market is, buying a trend, creating an investment thesis. Not to say like even in Toronto is a market that might have opportunity with multiplexes taking place right now, right? Where you're seeing upzoning. And upzoning is something we've been talking about on the show since like you go back and listen to like one of our first 10 episodes, we were talking about how every city in Canada would eventually be upzoned to multiplexes. And 2 years later, here we are. Every city in Canada is now getting upzoned to multiplexes. Mm-hmm. Not to, say that we have a crystal ball, but the point is like examine what the political world is doing and create an investment thesis based on that and grow within it. And so teaching people the skills to identify what those things are is probably one of the big priorities. The next piece is analyzing what a good deal looks like in comparison to a bad deal. And then a lot of it, and I think a lot of coaching doesn't really admit this, but is that it's just like people are paying for accountability in a lot of the cases, right? And we have regular coaching calls. I think like most of the stuff, like if you really just wanted to know as much as you possibly can about real estate, you could probably get most of it from just listening to our podcast for free. It doesn't come with visuals, right? Because it's audio only, and it doesn't come with regular check-ins and accountability and systems and checklists and things that you need to do, right? Needs identification, and here's your homework, and come back to me in a week with all of these things done. Those are the things that I think like most people, they look at a goal and they say, I want to own 10 multiplexes by the time I am retired, and I want that to subsidize my multiplex, and they can't even see what the last 3 steps look like, and they can't see what the first 3 steps look like.
Right.
For us, it's like we've done that. We've helped numerous clients do that, and so identifying those steps and making sure they take them and getting people all the way through from somebody who's never bought and wants to go to their first and then scale to their second to, we have people with hundreds of units in the course who are trying to figure out how do I get a blanket mortgage and restructure my finance or, my financing on this portfolio to scale to, either become a private equity or a professional GP or whatever. Right?
I mean, there's endless things that you can learn.
Yeah.
But the accountability piece is key because without that, people don't take that first step or they don't take the second one.
Well, even like, we were talking with the guys from Cashin about this yesterday, like, mutual friends who were here doing the real estate rodeo. If anybody wanted context on why we were all wearing cowboy hats.
And I didn't get
by the way. Yeah.
Rob's been cowboy for 4 days now. He's cowboy.
Cowboy.
And, like they are coaching clients for other coaches out there in the space. We are coaching clients. We've paid a lot of money for people who, this is a space I never used to believe in, but when you're giving somebody a lot of money to do something, you're so much more likely to listen to what they tell you. And it's not hard for us to like substantiate, if you pay $5,000 for a real estate course and then you save half a point on the value of that property, you made your money back instantly. Right. But the sunk cost, it's almost like a retainer, right? Or a consulting fee on the way in. Like you pay a management consultant a ton of money, you're going to listen to what they tell you to do.
Yep.
That accountability piece, that sunk cost bias, I think is something people discount for.
Yeah, I think so too. And I would agree that like optically it's easy to dismiss, but a company like I'll use us as an example. We use coaches all the time, whether it be on our strategy front, whether it be even more, let's call it micro from financial modeling, personal professional development. Like we are a true believer in that, but critical component of it is to find the right people. Yeah. The right people for you at the right time as you evolve as a practitioner, as the business evolves, your needs change. So I think your entry into that coaching space is great. I loved your comments on the thesis and fundamentals. Like these guys absolutely do what they preach. The upzoning piece, like the overarching thesis, I think, is Canada is massively undersupplied.
Yeah.
As it relates to residential housing, which has created unaffordability, which has had an impact on our production. And that's our overall thesis, is how do we support real estate investors to solve this? And to that point, on the upzoning piece, you guys have been on us to figure out a mortgage product for Canadians, for your clients, on how do we support with that zoning. Like, we love residential. We don't like the multifamily as much, but we see a lot of opportunity there. And Calgary, you could build 4 units on a single family lot now without much red tape. Right. You guys are seeing it in Ontario. Yeah. So stay on us on that is what I'm pointing. Well, we got to figure that out.
I think there's an interesting space evolving where people talk about the missing middle. There's like a missing middle in the capital market as well, right? Where you've got some of your A lenders will go up to 4 units on a residential credit product, I think, on a takeout loan, but then it's not a ton, right? It's kind of an underserved market on that 4 units. And we had a conversation with Mike Moffat about this on our podcast. The capital market still needs to evolve to be able to properly, if the government's going around telling everybody to build the product there's no infrastructure existing to build, right? So we don't have building code that knows how to execute multiplexes, right? Sometimes you're going to get permits and they're arguing about whether or not you need sprinklers, right? They don't know because nobody's built a fourplex in the past 20 years or 30 or longer. We don't have credit products. We don't have construction loans, right? I mean, you've got a Foremost Financial in Toronto is doing a lot of that stuff. But what about a retrofit, right? You're buying a residential and you want to convert it to 4 units, which is, pretty common in our multiplex event with rehousing on August 22nd in Toronto is gonna cover that substantially, taking a house and cutting it up into 4 units.
Yes.
But you buy that house with, a lender, they're not going to want you
Good
to
luck trying to have them figure that out for you.
Or and just saying to them, hey, I'm going to go and I just got building permits to do this. And they're like, maybe you're not doing that actually.
Go ahead, but pay us out and find a construction product or a rehab product that doesn't exist.
Right. And I know you guys are doing great work in the BRRRR space, right? So it's not far off. I'm just going to apply the pressure that you asked Nick to apply to you now. It's only one extra unit there. Or 2 extra units from what you're already doing. Yeah. You're probably the market leader in that, right?
Yeah. And our underwriters know the flip for adding the basement suite. Our underwriters know construction. So you're kind of building a bit of a hybrid there, which
it's just uncharted territory.
The market trend is going to go there. We're early days, but yes.
And how do you de-risk on, those extra 2 units, on the sprinklers, on cost overruns on a very foreign product? How and this is the trail that we're blazing right now. Yeah. And we're there's a few key players in the space that are really trying to answer the tough questions that are going to help get this stuff done. And you mentioned this structural shortage that we have in housing in Canada. You guys just grew by the fastest growing sovereign state, so
Alberta,
on earth in the last quarter was Alberta, 11% year-over-year population growth, right? And you guys are good at building houses, better than Ontario.
We have a really good business environment compared to the bulk of the provinces.
But you're still going to be 10 people moving here for every new house that you're building. In Ontario, that's
and we're
5, 6.
Yeah,
right. And so in Ontario, we've got high-rise condos. You've got a record 3 years of supply in high-rise condos, 120,000 high-rise condos closing in the next 5 years. And then you've got a gap in supply. That 5 years of closings is still not enough for the population that we've had. So what is going to happen in the absence of new supply being built, because money's too expensive, it's not economical for builders to build, at least in Ontario, the existing supply is going to have to get cut up. And I'm not saying this because I think it's a good thing, but it's just it's the writing's on the wall. You have to take existing lots or existing houses and cut them up into more units.
Yeah.
There's no other way to accommodate more people unless you just want to have mass homelessness. And our climate just isn't really conducive to that.
And then even you get into quality of life, how many people is it actually desirable to live in a high rise? Certainly there's a percentage of them, but is it as many as the GTA has built? And even the high rise, I'm curious, I think you guys posted about that CBC 15-minute expose on the high rise market right now. And it's crazy how they went into basically purpose-built short-term rentals And I think that's the bulk of that supply today is those like,
hotel
let's call them 500 less square footers.
They're all like, what is it? I think like whatever the smallest CMHC will insure is like 350 to 400 square feet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the size of this room, right? Like it's
well, I'm in a huge studio here.
Hear the echo.
Yeah. I think that's another reason why the multiplexing, taking that single family home, cutting it to 3, 4, 5, because within that space, and we've got some great partners in Toronto that are executing this stuff beautifully. And when I mean beautifully, like you walk in and like you still have the character of a Victorian house.
Mm-hmm.
You've got archways or exposed brick or big bay windows and that kind of stuff, but you've got a 3-bedroom apartment. 3 bedrooms don't exist in condos, right? They really don't. They make up like a single-digit percentage of what's actually produced.
Yeah,
And
developers will put as little as humanly possible.
literally, like I think there's a lot.
There's typically you're zoned. You have to
provide a couple.
Yeah.
But I mean, you start to see human behavior with impact real estate a lot, right? I mean, before the pandemic, the little box apartments were okay because everyone moved down to the city, barely spent any time at home, right? You wake up, leave, go to work, go out, you're living that city lifestyle.
Yes.
You go home and sleep in essentially what is a big bedroom with a kitchen 15 feet away from your bed. But that's over now. That's done. We saw the pandemic force people to want more property, more space. And now with everyone working from home, or at least a lot of the majority of people
like that's yet to come back in Toronto.
Exactly. So I'm really worried that a lot of these small one bedrooms, 1 bedroom with a den that is a 3-foot intrusion into the wall that really isn't purposeful for anything. Like you can't even put a desk there or anything. I'm really worried about what's going to happen with a lot of these, right? You can only have so many extremely standard Airbnbs, right? Like there's no pull factor for any of these. And that's why, I go for a lot of walks in and around the neighborhood that I live in, which is kind of Trinity Bellwoods, Little Italy, Little Portugal. And there's literally just always old nonas and babushkas sitting out on their porch. And not to get grim here, but a lot of the population that owns those types of properties probably has another 5 to 20 years maximum.
Right.
And I can just see that I think it's going to be a lot more desirable for people my age, our age, that are kind of looking for that condo alternative but want to stay in the city. And that's going to be in those houses that are cut up because there's no elevator, you're close to transit, you're not dealing with all the same BS that you are in a condo.
You got a true neighborhood and community feel.
Exactly.
So I think like something that you guys really focus on is that missing middle. This is in essence, we're talking about the missing middle currently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This would just be the small end of missing middle.
Yeah. This is more of like what our event is, which is focused on multiplexing. So just literally adding a unit to multiple units.
Right.
But yeah, as Dan said, this is like the smaller end of the missing middle, right? Missing middle goes all the way up to multiple stories and
like the mid and low rise stuff we're talking.
Yeah, like up to 4 stories.
Lower than the mid rise, right? That's the new category. That it's like mid rise to single family home, all that stuff in between.
Which is what you see in true, call it, is it legacy cities? Like if you go through
Europe,
anywhere near. Just go to Europe. Yeah, every single building is 6 stories for as far as the eye can see. I will pay someone if they can go to Rome, Paris, any major city there and find a single family home within, 10, 15 minutes of the central business district. Doesn't exist. But that's all we have in Toronto and in Canada.
But even like New York would still on a percentage basis have a decent amount of that. Like there's some big beautiful high-rise buildings, but there is a lot of that brownstone
like in Manhattan,
and that type of stuff that's insanely desirable. And then even higher density, 3, 4, 5 story buildings where city blocks en masse where people are living.
For sure.
And we don't see that nearly as much in Canada today.
No, I mean, we urbanized in a much like later phase. We urbanized most of our cities post automobile, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and like I don't live in the city. Like I live in the suburbs. Like I'm not a super fan of urbanization, honestly. Like I'm not to say I have anything against it, but the point I'm trying to make is like, it doesn't have to be that I'm this fervent supporter of like, that density or urbanization. It's that the economy and consumers are communicating what they want with their dollars by buying these products, right? Mm-hmm. In the suburbs or in the urban areas. And we're seeing more and more people who want to live in urban markets, even in a post-COVID world, even when we really have no idea whether or not return to office is going to be successful or how many days a week it is or whatever. People still want to live in the city of Toronto, close to the action, whatever the action ends up being in the future. The vehicle kind of broke that for a period of time. And then you had like, Toronto's like a tough one because you have the green belt. So people have to like drive extra far, right? But, people go out to the suburbs to like raise their kids or whatever, like, in a more suburban market, suburban area with a backyard the kids can play. Well, now the next generation of dual income households aren't having kids.
Yes.
They're having far fewer kids. And so all of these like things change. You have to pay attention to like these demographic trends to see what people end up wanting. And like, I think first and foremost, like our need would be to have affordable shelter. And then our generation will think about having more kids if they can afford to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to touch on that, right, going back to that human behavior discussion, that's exactly what I was getting at. If the only thing that people have is, hey, go and live 2 hours away from everything you've known outside of whatever city it is and buy a house in the suburbs, which a lot of people don't want or can't afford still, or stay downtown in a one bedroom apartment. How are you supposed to have kids? How are you supposed to start a family? How are you supposed to even get a dog?
Yeah.
Right? Like it forces people to. I mean, that's why this generation is where we are, because we have essentially been handed a box saying, "This is what you get. This is how much it costs. Try to make it work." Whereas if you look back on baby boomers, it was, "Hey, everyone gets a house. Everyone can have a family and all this stuff." And I really do think that real estate and the way that we've built it is kind of shaping the family dynamics.
Well, you said something, the advent of the car. I forget the name of the theory. You said Central Business District, monocentric city. Basically, you're in the core, your capital to land ratio is going to be higher. People commute in, the further you go out, the lower your value goes, basically. But you talked about the development of highways and how, there's two theories. One is the longer that you drive, or the more highways there are, the more that people are going to drive. But also people get lesser utility from cities that were developed in a post-automobile world. So you mentioned Europe. I was just in Barcelona a few weeks ago. I go there and I think Canada's a baby. Like we're barely a fetus. Let's look at countries, let's look at cities that have done it before and they do density differently in the manner that you guys are talking about, that true missing middle where you can go to school, you can go to the pub, you can go to the park, you can go to your office, all within a kilometer radius.
You're not suggesting a 15-minute city, are you?
Stay tuned. But I love what you guys are saying in that, the whole drive to qualify bit. Yeah. But, really, what has the vehicle done for new cities? Well, it's created lower utility and a lot of inefficiency.
Right.
If we're talking about just purely from a good standpoint.
Yeah, and I think like if you look at the long-term impacts of that, like a city like Toronto, that would be a mature version of like this sort of like suburban, like post-automobile city, very highway dependent. You have like a couple of options. You either live in a condo or you are house poor in a like semi-suburban city or neighborhood in Toronto. Or
you still need that car to go and access everything.
Well, like let's assume that like it's like Corso Italia where you like walk, right? You could. So that's like option number 2. Or you're like a little bit less house poor, but still house poor in like the version that you talked about, like a Leslieville or something like that, where it literally takes you an hour to drive from there to downtown still.
So 2 hours out of here. So 6.
And like that's like soul sucking traffic, man. That's like 3 kilometers. Like I'm like the 401 is like it's a little scary, like you're kind of on edge, and like there is some stop and go, but like Toronto right now, like traffic is like we're at our helicopter phase of like of the city cycle. Like, but nobody's rich enough to have the helicopter to fly to New Jersey, right? Like honestly, that's where like Toronto has traffic that is comparably bad to Manhattan and LA, but nobody's rich enough to helicopter everywhere.
Right. You don't have.
We need to be like we need to supercharge this helicopter phase.
Yeah.
Toronto is an hour from Toronto at all times.
Yeah. So and the point of that, like, and having that discussion is you look at a place like Calgary, which, like I really am of the thesis that like over the remainder of our lifetime, the same way that Toronto usurped Montreal as Canada's city, Calgary will usurp Toronto as Canada's city. Like I really, really feel it has the potential to do that, honestly. You talk to a baby boomer from the United States, ask them what Canada's city is in the world, it was Montreal. But to anyone from our generation, it's Toronto, I think, right? In the US, like everybody knows Toronto. Mm-hmm. I think that the next generation will think of Calgary when they think Canada.
And why? And let's just quickly hit on why do you believe that?
Because I think that you can visualize a lot of political migration taking place in the U.S. that we are seeing comparable trends in Canada, and it's not just like politics, like people moving for they like left policy or right policy more than one another. It's the impacts of those policies, and I'm talking like at a municipal level, like land use planning, capital controls, etc. Why is the average house price in Calgary $600,000 and the average median household income in Calgary is $90,000, and in Toronto median household income is $70K and average price is $1.2 million. So there are things that happen as a result of politics,
and they're already happening. Like we're already, so you mentioned the richer, like on average Calgarians make more than Torontonians.
Right.
On average Calgarians are younger.
Right.
On average, I believe we're having more babies.
Makes sense. You can afford to.
I mean,
we're more educated.
Right.
So you already, it's already, that flywheel's already going.
Yeah. And I think COVID gave people like that pause and reflect period of life where they're like, oh shit, like I actually have to be alive here and enjoy this. And, and maybe like I don't have to suffer in this fashion constantly. And like you listen to like the perspective, go on like TikTok and watch like the way that people talk about Toronto. They're like, it's a hamster wheel, it's a trap, like it's it's like there's very
our Instagram comments.
Yeah, it's a city that is really in a dark place right now, and so I think that policymakers, they aren't even aware of that. Like it's not that they're not trying to fix it. Like I think that people are good natured and they probably would try to fix it if they were willing to acknowledge that that's a problem. But they like
so
literally
it's early innings with that problem. Like we weren't acknowledged. Like, when did we start acknowledge from policymaker standpoint? Federal, provincial, municipal. When did we start acknowledging this housing supply issue?
August of last year. Yeah, almost immediately after Justin Trudeau said that housing was not a primary federal responsibility, and they absolutely cratered in the polls as a response to that because it was probably the most tone deaf thing he could have said. And they within weeks, it was the primary federal responsibility.
And now you guys have been talking about it for how long?
Yeah, I've been talking about it since like I was born, pretty much.
Right.
Like, honestly, like I don't know, like since I the past, like you can go back on my Instagram and look at videos from 10 years ago where I was saying buy duplexes on major arterial roads in the GTA that are in secondary plans, because eventually they were already at that point, secondary plans already said, hey, this can be upzoned to something greater in the future. And I wasn't saying upzone them and do that development today. I was saying buy it, cash flow it, sell it to a developer in 10 years. And here we are 10 years later. And had you done that, you would have made an absolutely insane amount of money. So we've been talking about this since forever, like since we've been making content. And it wasn't like, it's not rocket science. Like people, they listen to what we're saying and they're like, oh, you're so brilliant. I'm like, no, there's policy documents that have been contemplated by teams of lawyers and tons of consultants, and politicians themselves have been reviewing these things and putting thought and time and energy into shaping policy to tell you how to do things with your capital. And people just are not paying attention to it.
Mm-hmm. And never mind just basic supply and demand.
Right. The economic picture isn't going to change, right?
Like, it's exasperated through the immigration. Like, did we see this amount of immigration coming?
Like, did we predict it or think it was happening?
I don't think anybody would have seen like the huge growth in non-permanent residents, because like that was, I mean, there's just some controls that are missing. Like still, like they got rid of
controls or strategy.
I mean, it's tough to say, right? Like, was it a deliberate oversight? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Or did they really ramp up to try and catch up for the gap that was created during COVID and kind of fumble that because they made a mistake? Like, I think it was just like a couple of policy errors that like
GDP play, right? We need to boost the economy.
I mean,
bring in a bunch of people.
It's that like, it's like,
helps.
you look at like the US and Canada, we have this like unique ability to look at the remainder of the world, where we'll be able to sit and watch the remainder of the world over the next 10, 20 years and say, oh, that's what it's going to look like if you go through a demographic collapse. We're going to go through it eventually too. We're just able to, like Canada and the US and very much in Europe, you're seeing the same place happen. Like the entire Western world is seeing this thing take place, where these are compelling places that lots of people want to live, and they're capitalizing on that because people want to live there. And we need people to live here because unfortunately, we have an older generation that cannot take care of itself. And I'm not saying that like people can't take care of themselves, but like somebody has to be the nurses and the doctors.
Demographics
and
don't work.
Right. So our population pyramid is inverted or was. And, you need a younger generation to do those things, but also to pay into the pension system,
The tax base,
right?
yeah.
And to buy the houses off of the boomers, right? Like, you know, Justin Trudeau came out and talked about how like we need housing values to stay high so that boomers can use that equity for retirement. It's like, who's going to buy all those houses from them?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we have to expand the size of the millennial cohort of people who's going to buy the houses from them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like, if you really want to examine why, like, yes, the demand is being driven by the massive immigration that we're seeing to Canada. And yes, I think that they've made huge policy errors in the way that they've executed that. But a part of it is like this necessary evil. The alternative is like you basically end up with what could be like sort of the end of capitalism, where you no longer have growth, right? Like capitalism literally relies on perpetual growth.
Is that the title of this episode? The end of capitalism.
Continuous growth, and whether growth be whether growth.
I've been called a communist enough on social media these days. But I mean, like, you know, look at China. Like China has 1.6 billion people. By the time we die, it's supposed to be like 900 million people in their population because of their birth rates.
One child, which is now resulted in.
Yeah, that, but also like when you
pull, the right demographic.
Yeah, but they're all like, their claim to fame was pulling all of these people out of poverty and into the middle class, and
out of rural into urban.
Yeah.
And it turns out that middle class people don't want to have kids as much as people who are either rich or poor, right? Like, and the impoverished, a lot of it is because of that family unit and like caring and a lack of education. And with the wealthy, it's because they can afford to. So you have like this middle class, this disparity is almost being like bred into the population as well, right? Where poor people and rich people are having kids, and the middle class is evaporating because they're not having babies anymore. But all of this to say that like a contraction of 50% in our population, like at the scale of what could happen in China, India has even fallen below the replacement rate on their birth rate. The only countries that are still growing on birth rate is like in Africa, right? Yep. And Canada is outgrowing most African countries
because
of immigration.
Of immigration.
Strictly immigration.
And to your point, basically, one of our strategic advantages in Canada, or North America for that matter, is there's truly billions of people who would love the opportunity to live here.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think that there's, you know, like, I mean, a lot of people talk about, you know, like the population moving here and how it's like designed to suppress wages and stuff like that. I mean, there's evidence that actually doesn't take place. Like if you look at the Mariel boat lift, which is when Fidel Castro basically told all the Cuban prisoners that they could leave, and they all went to Miami, and the population increased like 7% in like 2 quarters, and it didn't have any positive or negative increase on wages. But what it did is kind of like, and you see this in the US, and you hear a lot of it in the US and in popular culture, right? Certain cultures serving labor roles, this like cash economy that exists, and that supercharges growth. Like all of those cash jobs don't show up in their GDP per capita figures. Yeah. Right. So we're kind of like just seeing this cash economy starting to be created in Canada with like cultural microcosms and things like that. And these are the people who are working in a lot of those service jobs. Like they want to come here, they want to work. They're making way more money than they would at home. And that supercharged the next phase of recovery in America's growth, right? We have a similar setup here. A lot of people want to complain about it, but like there's also a case to be made that if you can sit around and complain about it as much as you want, or you can accept the fact that it's not, we don't get to shape policies. We can vote and stuff like that. And you can figure out, okay, what is the most likely outcome of all of these assumptions that are being handed to me by politicians, and form an investment thesis, form your future plan, the 20, 30 years that you have left of your, economic life to capitalize on these things that are taking place.
So I think the next 20, 30 years, Canada could, we could go one of two ways. We could kind of keep trucking along the way we are now, which is not so great for a lot of people. I also think we could go through a massive decade or decades of prosperity, right? Look at all the natural resources just here in Alberta, let alone in the rest of the prairies. And, I saw the stat the other day, Canada has like 360 billion trees alone, right? I think we've got the second most lakes in the world outside of like Russia. So fresh water, potash, oil, uranium. The biggest uranium deposit in the world is in Saskatchewan. Like, I think that as we're going to have to start to change the way that we look at the natural resources that are here in Canada. And I think if everyone can get a little bit more financially secure, that's going to start to change everything. I think people start to have more kids. I think the housing crisis will go away a little bit, right? I think if we can just figure out how to like extract what we've been given here in the right way, and there's a ton of jobs to be created out of that stuff too, right? Okay,
So
we've got crude oil. Okay, that's a challenge. Let's build the technology to get that out better than anybody. Let's build this stuff so that we can do it in sustainable and respectful manner. But why aren't we doing any of this stuff? It's just crazy. Like
not doing it. Somehow
we're anti doing it, right?
Yeah.
Just the same thing. You know, we're all real estate investors in this room, and I think every real estate investor I speak to has got, you know, obviously money and building wealth is one of the main reasons they do it. But almost all real estate investors I speak to, they've got a noble mission where they're like, I want to, you know, we're in a housing crisis. We all need to fix this. How do we do that? Adding more units, whether it's adding a basement suite or building, you know, a 12-plex, whatever it may be. Each one of those steps gets us incrementally better. But just as we've demonized, you know, the extraction of oil or whatever mines, we've also demonized investors. So I just think that the Canadian perception for a lot of people really needs to kind of do a full 180 because, you know, we're mad at the wrong things and the wrong people.
Well, I think we're just really divided, right? Like everything's been turned into an us. I think social media is really difficult for this, right? But everything's been turned into an us versus them thing. Like, you know, it's...
I don't even know who us and them are
It's
sometimes.
like landlord tenant, right?
Yeah,
or like,
yeah,
you know, and
I'm
it's
just
like
kidding,
these little class wars that are being carved out.
I think the
very
misunderstanding between that too, right? Like, okay, landlord people think, oh, BlackRock taking over the world kind of thing. It's like, no, I own like 4 duplexes, right?
Yeah.
Like and I treat my tenants with respect.
Like, what's really wrong with a large PE firm owning a bunch of houses? Like, honestly,
No,
really,
making housing better and more
exactly.
affordable.
Like,
you want the government to do it?
So yeah, I'm an optimist. I think the 4 people in this room are absolutely in it for the right reasons, which at the end of the day is to see a better Canada. To your point, I worry about where people are getting their information, which I think what's great about a platform like what you guys have done on the podcast, what you guys have done through your real estate investing meetups, like you're out there educating people. And I think where could you call it democratized learning?
Exactly.
Like through, like
It's politically
there.
agnostic.
And more you're seeing the right people create platforms like this, and hopefully others are listening to really look at solutions rather than problems. Because back to your guys' point, like what is any business or country or individual, they're going to be most successful by leveraging their core competencies and strategic positions. And Canada is natural resources, whether it's water, trees, mining, minerals, farming. That's our strategic advantage. And for some reason,
we ignore it,
particularly in the larger centers. It's ignored and demonized, which is really so sad.
It's also like the only way out of this, really. Like the only way out of, like, you know, the GDP per capita falling off of a cliff in Canada is to diversify our economy. Like we know for the last 7 quarters what it looks like when you try and concentrate a massively growing population into what Canada's existing economic infrastructure looks like, right? Which is basically just consumption, housing, limited resources that are really more capitalized upon by the US. If we want to grow, we have to capitalize on all of the new affordable labor that we just got by putting it to work in the resource economy, or not even the resource economy, anything more diverse than like the 3-sector economy that we have right now.
In the most productive means possible.
Right. And I think you're going to see, like, there's an obvious political shift happening in Canada. It's like, you know, it's not even political to talk about it anymore because it's just clear in polling, like, unless...
Is it going to happen?
Of course, yeah. I mean, like, it's like, look at polling and look at what just happened with Toronto St. Paul's. Like, I mean...
That was big.
Crazy. So
I don't know.
Yeah, I would bet you like,
but I'm now in Alberta and I've been here since I finished.
I would bet you like a significant portion of
about the future of the company if it doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, I think we're fine.
All right, well then we're fine.
Yeah. Well,
so let's blue sky here. Let's imagine everything goes our direction, right? We as Canadians agree en masse, or at least the majority. Yes, we need to get more productive. Yes, we need to take advantage of what's been provided to us. Not even taking advantage of it, like the world wants it. It's going to be produced.
And I don't even think taking advantage. I think it's
optimize it.
Right.
So we got all that running. The economy's good. We got this housing issue. You guys talked. We've talked about missing middle. What would you guys love to see as steps that we need to take in order to truly solve this and create affordable housing? Like we have policymakers say we want to do it in the next 10 years. In order to do it, we need to build, I think it's like 3.5 million new dwellings. Today we don't. That's a pipe dream.
Well, I think we need to accept that like the average Canadian isn't gonna like. Let's just accept that the square footage consumption of an individual of a Canadian is going to shrink by like 30 to 40% in the next 10 years.
Sure.
Well, it already has. Like, you know,
It's going to
we
continue
don't
to
know
shrink.
where.
Which also, before you go on, let's be clear that that's probably okay. I want everyone to think, listening, about your house or even your parents' house, for instance. My parents had a very large house, nothing extravagant, but just, your standard larger house. They used like 3 rooms in that house.
Totally.
Okay. So most of the space that Dan's referencing right now is walked through, right? Like you've got a living room and a family room and a dining room and the TV room. You go from the kitchen to the TV room to maybe the desk to the bathroom to bed. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the suppression of that square footage is a natural thing. And again, if you look at anywhere around the world, Canadians, Americans, and Australians all have houses that are way too big for them.
Yeah.
Going back all the way full circle, this is why we multiplex everything, because we can take that one house and instead of having 2 people living there, we can now have 10 people living in there and a better use of that space.
So we're adding, so one thing we're doing is we're adding density either to existing structures or existing land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do we have the right,
incrementally?
We mentioned that today the infrastructure in banking doesn't quite exist.
Yeah.
Does it exist in zoning?
Sounds like it's getting there. Like, yeah. So, I mean, you're starting to see these blanket up zones to 4 units in most municipalities. And then the next question is like, does water and sewer capacity allow for it? That's probably one of the big question marks that like,
It's a touchy subject.
But it's okay because we're going to move back to being productive. GDP is going to go up.
Remember, we're living in utopia.
We're going to have resources to invest back into infrastructure.
Well, I mean, like to me, it's like, okay, increase the infrastructure size then. But, you could argue that a lot of these, like the household size has been shrinking so significantly in Canada that, when all of these water and sewer infrastructures were originally created and contemplated, then the average household size was like 5 or 6 people in a house.
Right.
And now it's shrunk to 2. And so if you have 3 households of 2 people, you have 6 people. So and before you had 6 people. I don't know. I mean, like that argument could be made. Like it's so like that would have been your original like clay pipe or a cast iron pipe back in the day. And now it's been changed. They wouldn't have downsized it ever when they switched it to ABS or whatever they're using for water and sewer pipes in, like for this, I'm just thinking sewers, but they would have run the line in the same size. Is the pump big enough? I don't know. I mean, these are questions that we're going to have to answer on the fly, to be honest with you, because we have a problem that needs to be solved very quickly. Like, and yeah, maybe like you're not going to get 100 multiplexes tomorrow.
No, it's going to happen over time.
Right. So it doesn't like, yeah, okay. You add 20 units to a street that maybe needed a new sewage pump. Are you going to notice it immediately? No, probably not.
The thing I'd like to add to that is I think, what are the changes we need to see?
Changes we need to see or things we need to do, like
things we need to do. So, you look at some of the statistics, Canada is the second slowest for issuing construction permits in the OECD. The only country that's slower than us is the Slovenian Republic.
Slovakian is
third, right? Third, yeah. So
they both have slow in the name.
So why do we have, why is that even a thing? Like that is insane to me, right? Not only that, but once you actually start to build it, you've got development charges, you've got all these like parks charges. Like, I mean, you talk to a guy that's multiplexing stuff in Toronto and there's 25 line items as this cost, because they don't even make any sense. Then fast forward, we have 700,000 plus skilled trades workers retiring in the next 3 years.
Yeah,
where the hell is the labor going to come from to build this shit?
And I believe we're seeing less and less going into the skilled trades.
Oh, it's way less. Yeah.
College and
everyone wants to be a TikTok star.
It's all like tiny, like nobody, like it's like 3% of non-permanent residents are in construction, where it's 8% of the regular Canadian population.
They gotta get in there. We gotta emphasize
younger generations. Literally, a study came out. Younger generations want to be TikTok and YouTube stars. They don't want to pick up. Last thing they want to do is pick up a hammer. They'd be happier putting a suit on and making 50 grand than putting work boots on and making 150 grand.
So they're just not. For some reason, we got to educate.
I don't think it's education. I think it's like I don't even think it's education. Like you could tell, like, it's not, the education isn't that much. You could literally just show them, like, here's the salary of somebody who can, even just be a laborer. Like, you don't need, you could go sweep construction sites and make twice what you would so you show them that. That's the education that was necessary. Yeah, they can figure out the rest while they're immersed in that world. I think it's this cultural sentiment around, like, whether or not it is like this honorable thing to do, and I believe it is. And
I don't think there's anything more on.
I agree with you, but like I think that but I think the young people's perspective, I don't know if it's pop culture or what it is. I'm not watching all of the things that they're consuming, but there's not this like attraction towards that career, and so that's what needs to be figured out, right? I think the other thing, in regards to, like, I think the capital market needs to evolve in order to make this happen. Totally. I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces. I know CMHC's touched on it a little bit, and our conversation with both Housing Minister Fraser and Shadow Housing Minister Scott Aitchison on the podcast talked a little bit about that. I think they're paying attention to it, and I think we'll see programs take place on that.
Yeah, and they have to create the platform for it to evolve, right? Like in the States, the minute there's a gap, it's filled. Because they're just so capital.
Yeah. Well, they overbuild.
In the capital markets. They overbuild.
Yeah.
The reason they overbuild is because the bulk of home builders are pubcos and they need to front run.
Yeah, 100%.
They need to front run the shareholders. And we talked about capitalism is all about growth.
But look what happened in China. Same thing in China, right? China's housing economy is in free fall right now. Same thing. Evergrande, Country Garden, these multi-billion-dollar companies that were literally going and building, cities that would dwarf the size of Calgary that no one lived in, and the Chinese population was going and buying them as investment properties. No one lives in them. Things start to fall apart, and again, they were just answering to the shareholders, right? We've got to keep building. We can't stop. We've got to keep building. No one's living in these. They're investments, and now. We've seen two of the biggest defaults in real estate history,
almost in business history.
So
we definitely don't have that problem in Canada.
No.
So let's get back into, okay, where do we see the capital flow in asset class today? Where do we see it in years to come?
Yeah, I mean, today, like, nowhere. There's no capital moving. I mean, you saw probably like the biggest transaction volume that you were going to see, I think, for the next several years was that those people trying to front run that capital gains.
Right.
There's a lot of commercial transaction taking place in that, like, kind of first quarter, I guess, of this year. Mm-hmm. First and second quarter, like running up to that. July or June 24th was probably like the most popular closing date in Canada this year.
Which, by the way, the government planned.
Yeah.
If you look at their projections of what this capital gain tax will be in, I think it goes down by 50% next year. So they knew that it was
in the budget,
bringing the money into the coffers, but then decrease right away. So I think it's important for the listeners to hear.
Yeah, that's a good point. I saw that in the budget, and I was wondering why they expected it to drop off so substantially. So it's a good catch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think pre-election. Engineering.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you see a lot of money looking to do stuff in multifamily and small multi. I think you see a lot of money flowing out of condo or trapped in condo. Like, that's a very liquid market right now. So it's probably like that's very scary. It's like systemically risky from my lens, and I've been sounding the alarms for a long time on that one. So I'm not going to
isolated to two cities.
I think Vancouver's, like, most of it seems to be getting ironed out. I think it's almost exclusively Greater Golden Horseshoe, and it's bad. Like, there's a lot of risk in that right now. Maybe
those
for another.
Companies made enough money for a long enough time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even really worried about the developers, right? Like it's
all
just
the people that scraped every penny they had together, called in friends and family.
The pre-sale culture, which is remarkable to me. Like, I didn't even know about this.
Oh yeah, man,
it's come on TikTok. That's where everyone was getting their advice to buy these things.
Yeah. It's that culture and that part of the business is interesting.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of money trapped in that. I think there's a lot of money seeking. I mean, you look at, like, the national average cap rate over the Canada 10-year bond yield. Like, it's a chart that typically tracks within like 400 basis point spread, and it's like the tightest it's ever been, and it's stuck there, 280 basis points above the Canada 10-year national average cap rate. Why is that? Well, you got CMHC pumping money into the multifamily program, and all of this transaction volume taking place, and caps have stayed relatively low.
And that money pump is making things feasible.
Well, you can,
but it's also dragging, it's it's artificially making it feasible.
Well, your cap, like, so usually like on a traditional mortgage, if you're buying a regular house with like a 25-year AM on 80%, 75% loan to value, you know, just quick math would tell you that you need your yield or your cap rate to be higher than your interest rate.
Totally.
But when you take a property and you spread that AM out over 40 or 50 years on a CMHC MLI Select mortgage, now it doesn't matter because, you know, your principal payments reduce your monthly burn rate so much that you can hit their debt service coverage ratio at a very low cap rate. And so that's artificially kind of suppressed caps and capped a lot of money moving into the multifamily market. I don't see much else happening outside of that, honestly. Like, I mean, retail's still ripping because our population just grew by 4% for 2 years straight, and our retail didn't grow by 4% for 2 years straight. So, yeah. And so, yeah. So, like, let's say you've got 10% more people in Canada than you did 3 years ago, and you don't have 10% more retail. Like, people are like, oh, yeah, there's no recession. Everything's so busy. I'm like, well, it's busy because there's more people. Like,
right.
You know. So you're seeing some retail transactions, stuff like that as well. Office is a question mark, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'll remain a question mark for some time.
Yeah, I agree. I think going back to the original question, you know, where's capital going? Where's capital flowing? I think we're going to see some of the forgotten cities in Canada really start to be paid attention to over the next 10 years. Right. And for anyone listening to these, I'm not saying forgotten cities. We're all well aware they exist, but from an investment standpoint, you didn't need to go there. You didn't need to go to Edmonton, Saskatoon, Regina, Winnipeg, Moncton. You didn't need to go there. You could make money in Toronto and Vancouver and Calgary, and still can, and, you know, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah. There's definitely still opportunity,
For
but,
sure.
but it's
But
significantly more muted.
It's harder,
and will remain that way, I think.
For sure, and that's because it's more capital intensive. There's more barriers to entry. It's more sophisticated, right?
It's more efficient. It's just right, like because of the amount of inflow, it's a more efficient market.
Yeah.
Whereas you could still arbitrage inefficiencies in these smaller markets.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's where I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see the prairie provinces finally get a little bit of respect they deserve. And I think that if we,
as he says this wearing a cowboy hat in Calgary, Alberta.
Come on. And I think that if we can figure out, again, full circle, if we can figure out the natural resources, well, guess where most of those natural resources are?
Right.
They're close to those cities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, Sudbury in Ontario, great market to invest for the most part. We have some property in Sudbury in our fund. Mining town.
Yeah.
Right. Like, why don't we have more of those? Why we've got the ability to create massive industry around these things and you know, build these new cities, build into these existing cities and make them better. And I as the optimist out of Dan and I, one of us has to be. That's where I'm. That's what I'm really excited.
Is just for clickbait.
I know. We're both realists, actually. Okay?
I agree. I wholeheartedly.
No, we're both realist.ca. Go check it out. But no, I'm excited. I think the next 2-3 years are going to be difficult and really shitty, but I think it's going to be really focused on GTA, GTHA. And I think there's a kind of negative feedback loop that's happening specifically in Toronto and the immediate surrounding areas,
which we've talked about. Yeah.
And I think kind of if you were to draw, you know, circles around Toronto as like all the way across the country, I think that pain gets less and less the further you get away from Toronto. Now, of course, everyone's feeling the pain at the supermarket and the gas bills and all that kind of stuff, right? Everything's more expensive, inflation and interest rates and everything. But strictly from what does the next 10 years look like? I'm very excited to see the come up of these other cities.
Have you ever read the book The Fourth Turning?
No.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So he convinced me to read it, and it was.
And he just did an updated version of the book.
But it literally predicts everything.
Yeah, it is eerie actually. Like and you know, a lot of people think that I'm like, it was funny, like the Cash and Boys call me Doomer Dan, and it's like, you know, I actually am not pessimistic, but like I understand that I come off that way, but to me the reason is because the problem is the solution, right? Like,
so I love that comment. The Discussing the problem
Right.
is the only way we're going to create solutions.
Well, and I think that like, unfortunately, like, so you had two paths for Canada, right? One was we continued on the path that we were on. Prices continued accelerating. Wages weren't enough to keep up with inflation and the cost of living and house prices, et cetera.
Productivity
And that
continues
sucked.
to decrease.
Right.
We continue to demonize
Yeah.
our core competencies, competitive advantages.
Yeah. Or
No strategy on immigration, all these things.
Right. Continue on that path. Or door number two is you have to let it burn down. And the fourth turning really talks about this, is like at the end of a fourth turning that you restart this generation, or this generational cycle. Like, look at how divided we are right now as a population. And you need this kind of like burning down of the world to happen, like, and economically is the most likely way for it to take place, where people
typically that happens through the debt markets. Like Dahlia talks about this. In everything.
And you can map his cycles beside these cycles in the fourth turning. It's fascinating. But at the end of this whole thing, people are forced to unify because we have this common enemy, which is like rebuilding the world together, right? And to me, we like everything is so messed up that it has to really, really just like burn down. And then, like the phoenix rise from the ashes kind of thing, right? And I think that's the point that we're at. And really like our entire adult lives, like our entire like economic lives will be the 20-year process of doing that. And that's what the turning is. And then we hand it to the next generation, and then they start to
screw it
get,
up. And
they slowly do, because but we need to go through this trial. I mean, like, you look at just on an individual basis, people got to struggle to grow, right? To be and like,
it's not comfortable.
Right. And we've never we've had a very, very privileged run as a country in Canada. Yeah. This is the first time we've really, we didn't get touched in like 2008, right? The last time we really, really had it burned to the ground was in the 90s. So like 30 years of prosperity. It's time, right? Let it burn. You have to just let it burn. The more they interrupt it, the worse it's going to get. And we recover from there. And I think the last piece I'll add is, like, I think that when I talk about the problem being the solution, municipal governments, federal governments, all of these different governments that have been absolutely like abusing money, taxing everything, and not being accountable to taxpayers, they're all going to be forced into a period of austerity in the next 5 to 10 years because of the budget mistakes that they made. And that is going to solve the problems of the Slovak Republic, why we're the slowest in the world, because they're going to start trimming the fat. Bureaucracy is going to shrink. I honestly think that the federal government today, the administration, is overhiring to set it up so that that when the transition takes place, that the next government has to do a ton of firing, and it makes them really look bad.
But that austerity is so tough because
you can't not do it.
We should get a super majority in the next election, so that should give them the leverage to be able to make those hard decisions.
Well, they will, but they have to, because at a certain point, if you cannot service your debt, or if your ability to service your debt, or as a sovereign looks compromised, then your currency suffers and your value as a trade partner suffers. And these are all things that are necessary for us to grow. And so, and this happens on a municipal basis as well, right? When you're in a recession, it's not like the governments also are in a recession. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to have to start scaling these things back. And that will create a ton of efficiency. Like, look at AI. A lot of these jobs that are going to be lost over the next little bit, especially in the bureaucratic space, where it's literally just reading policy and interpreting it, which a computer can do frankly far better than I can do.
Yeah, for the most part, it's interpreting things better.
We're only throwing $1 billion at that. It's not like a lot of R&D at that. But.
Right. Yeah. But that a lot of that shift is going to be probably deflationary from my perspective as well, right? Because those jobs are never going to get replaced.
But this is what gets me excited, right? I mean, again, doom and gloom, Canada's going to burn to the ground, right? But if and when that does happen, and at whatever scale it does happen, what gets me really excited is, any person below the age of 50 listening to this, we're going to spend the next 20 years rebuilding this country.
There's opportunity
better than it ever has been.
Yeah.
Right. So there's nothing but opportunity in the next couple decades.
Again, there's literally billions of people who
we are extraordinarily
would love
lucky
to live here.
Yeah.
We have resources that countries could only.
The worst thing about Canada is the weather. Literally,
Yeah.
that is the one thing that I think
it's a
small price to pay.
Price to pay.
Right.
So
And
we've
go
been
to-
here for an hour, guys. We've been here for an hour.
Yeah, I got
I got Dan looking at his watch. We got the guys needing cowboy boots. I got to get to a tent to go entertain some prospective clients. So did we miss anything?
I don't think so, man. I think it was pretty exhaustive.
Yeah.
How do our listeners get a hold of you?
Yeah, Daniel Foch on most platforms and the Canadian Real Estate Investor Podcast or realist.ca.
If you're not listening to the pod, if you're not following them on
They'll find
Insta, you got to do it because it is really amazing info. It's unfiltered. It's truly data driven. And us as a company who pays a lot of attention to the data to help us make decisions, we're intentionally following them and we get ideas all the time through that. So thank you guys for all you do and thank you for all your efforts and looking forward to making Canada a better place every day alongside great guys like you.
Amazing.
Likewise.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
That wraps up another episode of the Real Estate and Wealth Podcast. Be sure to hit that like button, share with fellow real estate enthusiasts, and subscribe to stay in the loop on all upcoming episodes. Get in touch with the team at Calvert Home Mortgage Investment Corporation by calling them at 1-888-752-4642 or email admin@chmic.ca. The opinions expressed in each episode belong to the individuals featured and do not represent the views of Calvert Home Mortgage. While we provide valuable insights, consulting with qualified professionals ensures that your unique financial circumstances are carefully considered, aligning your investments with your long-term objectives. Calvert Home Mortgage Investment Corporation is not a financial advisor, and we cannot advise you on making investments. There are risks to investing in real estate and the potential that you can lose all of your investment.